While Germany burned and millions of soldiers lay dead in the trenches, the man who had signed the empire into that war was busy negotiating his furniture. In November 1918, the last German emperor climbed onto a train and fled. His name was Wilhelm II. He was the grandson of Queen Victoria. In Berlin, they were declaring a republic. In Kiel, his sailors had raised the red flag. In the trenches, 2 million of his soldiers were dead. He crossed the border into the neutral Netherlands with what should have been the smallest suitcase in the story of fallen monarchs. It was not a small suitcase. While the Allies were formally demanding his extradition and trial for war crimes in the Treaty of Versailles, Wilhelm was quietly negotiating something else: his furniture, 60 railway carriages of it. Not a metaphor. 60. They rolled out of Germany across 1,919 and 1,920, packed with paintings, silver, porcelain, tapestries, imperial uniforms, hunting trophies, entire libraries, and the movable contents of several palaces. The Weimar government broke, humiliated, terrified of provoking monarchists, let it happen. Wilhelm bought a country estate called Huis-Dorn and reassembled the empire inside it, room by room. Here is where the reversal turns. The man who lost the throne did not lose the fortune. In 1926, after 7 years of negotiation, the Prussian state and the House of Hohenzollern signed a private settlement around 66 million gold marks in castles, art, cash, and land in exchange for renouncing claims on the rest. He drew an income from it for the rest of his life. He kept a court in exile, chamberlains, adjutants, servants who still bowed and addressed him as Your Majesty. And every day he walked into his forest with an axe. Trees were the thing. Between 1,920 and his death in 1941, Wilhelm personally cut down around 20,000 of them on the grounds of Huis-Dorn, a fact so strange that his own biographers keep returning to it, unable to decide whether it was exercise, therapy, or monarchical rage delivered to whatever could not fight back. He wore his spiked helmet in the garden. He wrote letters, thousands of them, blaming Jews and Freemasons and the British press for the loss of the war. He watched the country he had ruined slide into hyperinflation, then into a corporal from Austria whose rise he at first quietly cheered. He died in bed at 82, in a country by then occupied by the regime that had absorbed his old empire. Hitler sent a wreath. The German army provided the honor guard. The king who sold his own kingdom. There is a very specific kind of humiliation reserved for a monarch who has to be paid to leave. Farouk of Egypt experienced it, and then discovered he preferred it. In July 1952, a group of young officers led by Gamal Abdel Nasser surrounded the royal palace in Alexandria. Farouk, obese, gambling addicted, famous across Europe for his appetites and his kleptomania, was told he had a few hours to abdicate and leave. The revolutionaries expected him to resist. He did not. He signed the papers, packed his family onto the royal yacht Marusa, and asked one question that historians still find astonishing. Could he take his belongings? They said yes. It was the mistake. Farouk's belongings included the largest private collection of gold coins in the world, one of the finest stamp collections ever assembled, hundreds of rare watches, jewelry from 3 continents, pornographic art, Fabergé pieces, and this is documented, a genuine razor blade once stolen from Adolf Hitler. He sailed to Italy with the Marusa riding low in the water, and there, in exile, he did the thing no one expected. He liquidated it. Piece by piece, for years, the auction houses of Europe held sales of objects belonging to a former sovereign, and Farouk turned looted decades into cash. He lived in a suite at the Hotel Excelsior in Rome. He ate in the finest restaurants until his weight passed 300 pounds. He gambled in Monte Carlo. He collapsed, dead, over a plate of oysters and lobster in 1965, aged 45. He had lost Egypt. He had never lost a single restaurant bill. The emperor who kept the diamond. Now, before you assume every ex-monarch in exile is a story of quiet indulgence, meet the one who left with a rock. A big one. Bao Dai was the 13th and last emperor of the Nguyen dynasty of Vietnam, a lineage that had held the throne since 1802. When Ho Chi Minh's forces triumphed in August 1945, Bao Dai abdicated in a public ceremony in Hue, handing over the imperial sword and the golden seal of state. It was meant to be the moment a dynasty ended with dignity. He said the famous line that he would rather be a citizen of a free country than the emperor of an enslaved one. Then he moved to Hong Kong, then Cannes, then Paris. And he brought with him what he had not handed over, a private treasury of gold, jewels, and the piece the French intelligence services tracked for decades, an enormous historical diamond from the imperial regalia. The pivot happens here, because Bao Dai did not simply live on his hoard. He rented himself back out. The French, fighting to hold Indochina against the Viet Minh, needed a face for their puppet state. They installed him as head of state in 1949, paid him a fortune, and let him govern from casinos on the Riviera. He negotiated his own salary. He negotiated commissions. When the state collapsed and Diem replaced him in 1955, he simply returned to France richer, again, than when he had left. He died in a modest Paris apartment in 1997, having outlived his dynasty by half a century and every one of the men who thought they had used him, the Shah whose money outran him. Some kings lose everything the day they lose the throne. Others watch their fortune leave the country before they did. In January 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, boarded a plane at Mehrabad Airport and did not come back. Revolution was in the streets. The clergy were preparing the return of Khomeini. His army was disintegrating. He wept on the tarmac. Cameras filmed it. It was, on the surface, the total collapse of a Persian monarchy that traced itself in its own propaganda back 2,500 years. But the Pahlavi family had been preparing for years. Estimates of the fortune they moved out of Iran before and during the revolution range from $1 billion to more than $20 billion in today's money. The ceiling numbers are disputed. The floor is not. Real estate in Manhattan and London, industrial holdings, gold, art, and the Pahlavi Foundation, a charity that had for years functioned as a private slush fund for the dynasty. All of it was already abroad. When the Shah landed in Egypt, and then Morocco, and then the Bahamas, and then Mexico, and then finally, dying, in Cairo, he did not need a job. Here is the strange part. His wealth kept working after his death. Empress Farah, his widow, has lived for decades between Paris and Washington. His son styles himself the pretender king from a comfortable American life. The family did not merely survive exile, it endowed itself against it, and the endowment is still there. The Shah's mistake was believing he could hold the country. He never made the mistake of leaving the money in it. The emperor of nothing with a villa. For 100 years, French law had one clear rule about the family of Napoleon Bonaparte. They were forbidden to set foot on French soil. His nephew broke that rule twice, was crowned, was overthrown, and then did something no one predicted. He got comfortable. Napoleon III ruled France from 1852 to 1870. He built modern Paris. He waged wars in Crimea and Italy and Mexico. And in September 1870, at the disaster of Sedan, he personally surrendered to the Prussians with an entire French army, ending the Second Empire in a single afternoon. He was captured. His wife Eugénie fled to England. The Republic was declared in Paris while he was still a prisoner in a German castle. When the Prussians released him, He did what defeated French monarchs had done for a century. He went to Kent. But Napoleon III was not penniless. Eugenie had escaped with jewels, and the imperial family had quietly, for years, parked capital in British banks and Continental Investments. They bought Camden Place, a country house in Chislehurst. They kept servants, they kept a court. Deposed sovereigns from across Europe came to visit. The British aristocracy called on the fallen emperor as though he were still holding audience. He wrote pamphlets planning his return. He funded a political apparatus back in France dedicated to restoring his dynasty. He died in Kent in January 1873, 3 years into his exile. In the middle of a medical procedure, a wealthy country gentleman who happened to have once ruled 40 million people. His son, the Prince Imperial, inherited what was left, joined the British Army, and got himself killed by Zulus in South Africa, in a costume that was still, technically, imperial. The wheel turns again. The Bonapartes were exiled from France. They were not exiled from money. The Queen, who was never supposed to have any. You are Hawaiian. You are the last sovereign monarch of an independent kingdom in the Pacific. American businessmen backed by American Marines have just overthrown you, dissolved your throne, imprisoned you in your own palace, and forced you to sign an abdication under threat. It is 1,895. Everything you inherited from 1,000 years of Polynesian kingship is gone. And now, the strange part, you get richer. Queen Lili'uokalani of Hawaii lost the throne in 1893. The American plantation elite that toppled her expected her to fade quietly, humiliated, into a small pension and a smaller life. She did not. She sued. She wrote. She sailed to Washington and lobbied Congress. She published a book, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, which sold across the United States and, in a poetic irony, made her a small fortune in the currency of the country that had stolen her kingdom. She also owned land, a great deal of it. The crown lands had been seized, but her personal estates inherited from her family, distinct from the royal properties, remained. She managed them shrewdly for the next 20 years. She collected rents, she invested, she endowed a trust in her own name, the Queen Lili'uokalani Trust, dedicated to caring for orphaned and destitute Hawaiian children. That trust exists today. It holds, at current valuation, more than $1 billion in assets. It still serves native Hawaiian children, more than a century after her death. The woman who lost a country converted her personal wealth into an institution that outlived every man who overthrew her, and every treaty they signed, and the plantations they built on her stolen land. There is a specific detail that makes this land. When she died in 1917, the American governor of the territory of Hawaii lowered the American flag over the former royal palace to half-mast the same flag that had replaced hers. She had outlasted him too. The king who was paid to stop being king. Now the biggest turn. Because everything so far has been a monarch who kept a fortune, or grew one in exile. There is exactly one case in modern history of a king who was made richer by contract in exchange for ceasing to be king. And the wealth was so extraordinary that it broke the concept of abdication itself. You are the king of the United Kingdom. It is December 1936. You have been on the throne for less than a year. You want to marry a twice-divorced American named Wallace Simpson, and the church, the cabinet, and the dominions have told you that you cannot. You choose her. Edward VIII abdicated on the 11th of December, 1936, in a radio broadcast that stopped the empire. His younger brother became George VI. Edward became awkwardly the Duke of Windsor, a private citizen with a title, married to a woman the royal family refused to receive. Here is the pivot the biographers spent decades untangling. Edward did not walk out of Buckingham Palace with nothing. He walked out with a settlement. He had spent his years as Prince of Wales quietly accumulating a private fortune from the revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall, a personal estate legally separate from the crown that generates millions in rents every year. When he abdicated, he negotiated. He told his brother he was almost destitute. It was a lie. British courtiers later established that he had been sitting on well over £1 million, an enormous sum in 1936 hidden from the negotiation. His brother, believing him, agreed to pay him an annual allowance from the new king's own income. In effect, George VI was paying his older brother to have gone away for life. And when the truth about Edward's hidden fortune came out inside the palace years later, it poisoned the relationship between the brothers permanently, but the payments continued because a British king does not renege on a family agreement even when he has been swindled by the previous one. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor then spent 35 years being the richest professional house guests in the world. Bahamas, where he was made governor during the war and where they lived tax-free. Paris, where the French government gave them a mansion at a symbolic rent. Palm Beach in the winters, New York in the fall. Yachts belonging to friends, villas belonging to other friends. They almost never paid for a residence. They collected jewels. Wallace's jewelry collection, when it was auctioned by Sotheby's in 1987, sold for over $50 million. Some of the pieces bore inscriptions from Edward's years on the throne, and some had been quietly made using stones that had originally belonged to Queen Alexandra. He had given up an empire on which the sun did not set. He had traded it for something that in his eyes was worth more: the woman, yes, but also a life of pure private wealth, with no red boxes, no ministers, no ribbon cuttings, no duty. When he died in Paris in 1972, he was buried at Frogmore by royal permission, and Wallace followed him 14 years later. The Duchy of Cornwall payments had run for the entire duration. He is the only king in modern British history who abdicated. He is also the only one who negotiated his own price for it, hid his real net worth from his own brother, and lived out the rest of his life richer per hour of work than any monarch in Europe. The wheel turns, and sometimes it turns for a man who has arranged in advance exactly where it will land. 7 crowns, 7 exits, and not one man among them ended up in the gutter the way the storybooks promise fallen kings. A German emperor with a forest, an Egyptian playboy with a yacht full of stamps, a Vietnamese emperor with a diamond in his pocket and a French salary in his bank, a Shah whose fortune left the country before he did, a Bonaparte living as an English country gentleman, a Hawaiian queen who built a trust that outlived the empire that took her throne, and a British king who was, quite literally, paid to disappear and did it for 35 years, in the sun, with the woman he had chosen over a quarter of the world. The wheel does not care who is on top. The wheel only cares that the person who was on top last had time to prepare for the fall. If this one hooked you, the story of the concubines who ran empires their husbands only pretended to rule is waiting for you next. Same wheel, different direction.